Okay, so continuing on from the intro lesson, what I'd like to do here is explain some of these commands that we've set up here on the toolbars, showing you what their function is and how they can help you manipulate your different parts of your design to get the effect that you want. Okay, so working here in our window, what I'm going to do is start with some basic shapes, and then I'll apply the commands that I've been talking about this up till now and show you what they do. So let's actually start with a different line command this time. Before we get into the transformation stuff, I'll explain some of these other shapes up here and what they do. We talked about the control point curve before, which is like your freeform curvy line, for lack of a better term. There's also, right to the side here, what they call a polyline. It behaves in a similar way, except this one is meant to do more sharp angular shapes. So if I turn on my grid snap here, if I do one line and the next line, you can see it does angular shapes as opposed to the curved shapes of the other control point type of line. This can be really useful depending on what type of shapes you're drawing. You can easily mix the two as you're doing it depending on whether you want sharp or rounded edges. It's really useful for geometric type designs, as we'll see. And it works well in conjunction with the snap tool. If you don't want to use it, it is no less effective. As you can see here, you do lots of angular points, just like that, geometric shapes. So let's start with something a little bit more straightforward. Polygons, stuff like that, pretty simple. So the next one, circle, is exactly what it sounds like. You click a point, draw out the radius or diameter of your circle, and it creates your circle. Very useful. The one next to that, ellipse, same thing. You draw out your radius, instead it creates ovals. If you don't want a perfectly round sphere or circle, this is a pretty good command to use. I tend to kind of use them interchangeably since you can draw a circle if you want, but if you want to go narrow like an oval, you can do that. Arc, I don't really use that much, but you can use it to create rounded curves, kind of like using a protractor. That's what it reminds me of. I use the control point curve for stuff like that, so I don't really use that one too much. The next one, and mousing over each of the buttons is how I'm getting the name of the command here. So rectangle, again, like it sounds, you click one point, you click the second point after you dragged it to the right size, rectangle. Or square, you can fiddle around with the snap commands to make symmetrical or even-sided rectangular squares. And the last one, which I think is interesting, that we'll probably use at some point in the tutorial, is Polygon. Now, we saw when we did the Polyline, I drew a real quick, rough, four-sided object. Polygon is something a lot more powerful if you ever want to create a certain type of polygon. So I'm going to start here on the intersection of the axes. It doesn't matter where you start. And as you can see here, it's set to a five-sided pentagon. And drawing it out increases the size and actually the angle that it's going to draw the shape. If you want to create it perfectly in line with the axes, you can use snap to align it, and it'll stay. If you look up here on the command line, it says corner of polygon, num sides equal 5. The underscore is to mark where the command comes from. So if I want to change the number of sides, I just type n. And now let's say we want 8 sides. Hit enter. and it changes the shape that it's drawing to an 8-sided stop sign, an octagon. So if you ever need to draw specific sided polygon shapes, this is a good command to use because it just does it automatically, and then once you size it up, it's done. I've definitely used that one a lot. So these are our curve drawing commands. For what we're doing here, whenever we need to draw a specific type of object, we'll mostly be referring to these in some capacity. So now that we have that, let's talk a little bit about the transformation tools. I'm going to refer to the ones here, and some of them are duplicated up here on the transformation toolbar we added. So I wouldn't worry too much about which ones you use because they're the same if you see them in both places. So the first one, actually let's draw a circle that we're going to work with again. The first one here is the move command. This one I don't use too much because Rhino just lets you click and just drag objects around. If for some reason you don't want to do that, and I'm just hitting Control-Z to step back and undo. If you use this command, it's the same thing. It asks you to select what you want to move, hit enter, and then you can just drag it around. It's, I guess, more useful if you want to move things by specific increments, which you can specify right here, but I don't use this command too often. I don't work really with exact measurements, so that's not entirely useful. This next one, copy, on the other hand, is very useful. As it sounds, click on it, click on your object, and when you hit enter, or you can right click, they perform the same functions, right click and enter. Now, when you click around, you can copy whatever you've selected all over the place like that. If you have to copy multiple sections of a design, or you want to move things around but have identical pieces, you're going to be using the copy command. It's quite useful. Next is this one right here, rotate. Again, just like it sounds, let's use Polygon for this. When you click rotate and you hit enter, you can spin your selected object around the 360-degree axis here. You can even specify rotation amounts if you want to do things that precisely. Otherwise, it's good for just rotating things into place or whatnot. I, again, use this one quite often. And the final one we're going to talk about on this part of the toolbar is scale. As the name might suggest, when you click on something and then you hit enter, you can change its size, draw in and out to change its size. Very useful if you want to shrink or expand things depending on what you're working with. I use scale a lot too. So that's the commands that are on these default starting bars. And again, I'm pretty sure the software starts with these on the side. If not, you should be able to get them to pop up if you follow the recommended toolbar layouts I went through before. But let's go up here to the transformation bar. Now, there's a couple here I don't use, and you'll notice some like the move, copy, rotate, scale. Those are all duplicated here. The one that we're going to use right now that is what I consider to be one of the most important functions in Rhino is mirror. So when you use mirror, you take your object that you've selected, you hit mirror, you select a point in your window to serve as the mirror plane, and you can mirror an object symmetrically across that axis. That is incredibly helpful if you're creating symmetrical designs. Couple tips. Let's say you work primarily up on the Y and X axis here, which I recommend just so you have a good point of reference. Let's say I wanted to take a couple components and again, end snap is giving us closed curves or shapes. like so. And I want to completely mirror this over the y-axis on this side. I select all the objects. I'm going to turn on my snap and ortho, and you'll see why in a sec. And then you click mirror, and I select 2 points along the green y-axis to serve as the mirror plane. And you can see here, it has mirrored them symmetrically across the axis. Now, the reason why I turn ortho on is because it's going to mirror it straight across because it can only move in that direction. And I use snap to make sure I'm picking points along the green axis so that it's consistent. If you turn ortho off and you use mirror, you can mirror like this, which is also useful if you're not going straight across. Let's say I wanted to mirror it up this way and then draw something in here, then I can do it just like that, and I'm not restricted to just straight across if ortho was on. Mirror is one of the most important commands for doing this type of design work, in my opinion. Once you learn how it works and how to apply it to the different axes, it's very straightforward, and it's can save a lot of time. So those are the basics, some early beginner type transformation commands. Just using that and then the rendering commands I showed you earlier, you can already get started creating shapes in Rhino and just start playing around with the different commands for what you want to draw. So if we were to apply everything, let's say we take these 3 random shapes that I've drawn here and use the copy command, use the scale command to shrink them, move them over, use the rotate command to change the angle, and then select all of them, and we're going to use the mirror command to flip them. There you go. And to recap from the beginning lesson, once we have all of our closed shapes, and again, you can tell they're closed because it's a single line. We select all of them. We go up here to the surface command. We click it. It's created a surface across all of the different curves. We click the blue render button. There we go. Here's our image. You can save the image to the desktop. You can save it. You can copy it into another program, like I mentioned, if you want to put effects on it in Photoshop or something like that. But this is basically the image that you would use. There's your copy. It's your save as. You could even print it from here if you wanted. One question I'm sure is going to come up, I should address now. If you want a white background, because the default is that gray, dark gray background in render, just right-click the render command to go into the menu. On background right here, if you change this to white or any color, then it'll change what it renders as when you click the button with the left click. The right click is what brings up the properties. That's what these diagrams here are telling you. So now you can see it's this maroon background now. That might be useful if you're looking for a specific background, or if you just don't want gray, or depending on what the rest of the colors are, you can manipulate it there. Okay. So that is the second set of lessons in the tutorial that we're looking at here. Next time, what I want to do is go back to working with shapes, and I'm going to go through a couple more advanced commands that will further increase the versatility and flexibility you have when using Rhino. And it'll probably explain a lot of how I've done some of the designs that I've done. So next time we'll take a look at that and proceed from there. See you next time.